How many of you are familiar with the tarot, have had readings or have studied it or whatever? So almost everybody is fairly familiar with it. How many of you know that it is a study of spiritual growth and development more than anything else? Okay. Well, we're going to talk about that, and because of that, I'm going to pretty much limit the discussion to the 22 cards that make up the major arcana, because those are the ones that actually tell us the spiritual lesson that's playing out in our lives at the moment. And before I do that, I'm going to tell you a little bit about how I got involved with the tarot, because I don't know what your upbringing was, but I was raised as a Roman Catholic and was told that the tarot was either something of the devil, and of course to be avoided at all costs, or was total sham. And so for years it was like, so, until I met these two people. One was an accountant and another a school teacher, both very conservative, very upright people, and they kept telling me about this man that read the tarot and how wonderful he was and helpful and so forth and so on. I had a very serious question a decision I needed to make. And whatever I did, it was a matter of two choices. And whichever choice I made would dramatically affect the life of me and my son. And I had thought and done everything I could think of. I did not know what would be the right thing to do, and I had to make it fairly soon. So I decided, I didn't know what else to do. Let me go and ask this man. So I called him up. I went over to his apartment. He said, "Are you Sharon Reynolds?" I said, "Yes." He invited me in. He shuffled the cards. He said, "Pick 21." I did. I'd never really seen a deck before that. And he told me so many things about my life that had been true up to that moment. I couldn't figure out how these little picture cards could tell him anything personal about me. And because I can't stand not to know things, I decided to study with him. And by the way, what he said for the future turned out to be right on target. And that was kind of interesting to me too, because I was an atheist at that point. I had been an atheist since the age of 12. And, you know, if you couldn't see it, measure it, and quantify it, it didn't exist. My mother said, "You must have faith." And I'm like, that's the stupidest thing I have ever heard. And so I had just kind of said, all right, I'm going to live my life with what I can see. Well, when I began studying with this man, it is the study of spirituality, but it explained it in a way that made sense to me. Because as a child, what I was told about religion was from a child's perspective, and that didn't make sense to me. It still doesn't. I mean, if any of you were to hear what I had been told, you go, come on. But the tarot explained things in a deeper way that allowed me to understand, and then I got really interested. So then I started studying and doing readings for other people, and all kinds of things evolved, and here I am. So in most decks, there are 78 cards, 56 of the minor arcana, which are the events, situations, the people that are playing in your life. And the remainder, the 22 cards, are the major arcana. Those are the ones that talk about the spiritual lessons. That's why we're going to kind of focus on those, and that's what you see on the screen. Now, there are hundreds and hundreds of decks. Not all of them have 78 cards. One of my favorite is the Secret Dakini Oracle, and that's based on Tantra, and it has 64 cards. And it is totally spiritual in its everything. It does not discuss mundane issues at all. And I love that deck. It's a beautiful deck, but it's an entirely different system. Most of them are based on the 78 cards. The most common is the Rider-Waite deck. That's what you see here. And I use it primarily because, one, that's the deck I learned on, and also because the symbolism is very rich. There are a lot of symbols in the deck, and the symbols are very accurate for the Western mind. So even if you haven't studied the card, if you just look at it and meditate on it, you often will get a really good idea of how it pertains to your life and what's going on in your life by looking at the card. And that's important. I found when I use different decks, I get very different readings. And some of them I think are, for want of a better term, lopsided. This one, it gives, I think, a much more balanced reading, at least when I do the card readings with them. So that's what I use. Now, where does it come from? I don't think anybody actually knows. There's all kinds of wonderful stories, you know, but they can trace the first deck back to Italy in the 14th century, 15th century. And to this day, they play a game with the tarot cards called tarocchi. And some believe that the tarot is the French word for tarocchi in Italy. And some of the earliest decks are made in Italy. The deck, the Rider-Waite deck, came out in 1910 from the Golden Dawn. And it had disbanded at that time, but that became a known popular deck, and many of the newer decks since then kind of follow that format with their own artwork and their own little changes. There's just hundreds. If you're curious, the Phoenix and Dragon down the street has a really good selection where they've got books where you can look through and see examples of these different decks, so you can kind of get a feel for what they're like without having to buy 100 packs just to see what they look like inside. All of the cards represent a state of being, and the querent, this is the person asking the question, relationship to that state of being. This is how they are effective. And you can study the meanings like I did when I first started studying the cards. I went through them one by one. I memorized the meaning, both upright and reversed. I'd do 10 at night, and I'd start the next night. I'd go over the cards that I had learned up to that point and learn 10 more until I had finally learned all 78. And then I started doing readings with all the deck and just kept practicing and practicing. And as I went along, I learned other ways of learning the cards and using them, so I let go of some of that rigidity. And also, studying spirituality let me let go of some of that rigidity, and it's got to be A, B, C, D kind of a thing. And so there's different ways. You can meditate on a card. You can pick a card that is interesting to you or one you really don't like looking at and meditate on it to see what it can tell you. If there is an energy that you want to draw to you, you can place the card where you can see it repeatedly throughout the day, so you're consciously pulling in that energy, and that can help that way. You can use it for greater understanding. Some people only work with the major arcana, and some readings I do, depends on what I'm looking for. But most of the time I use the entire deck because it gives a richer, most of us don't live in this rarefied atmosphere of only dealing with the spiritual. We have lives. So we want to know how is this lesson affecting us in our real life. And when most people come for readings, they're coming because they have dilemmas of some sort. Now, I've chosen to do this way because most people think in a linear way, and it's organized. But I want you to understand, we do not go through the lessons like grade school, 1 through 6, and then high school. It isn't like you learn the first card, then the second, then the third. They pop in and out and back and forth. But to learn them, sometimes it's a little easier if you can learn them in this way. Now, let me show you something for just a second. This is the Fool. And the Fool is placed generally either at the beginning or the end of the deck. And you'll notice his number is 0. And that's because he really has no beginning and no end. And his thing is limitless energy of spirit. He is the trickster, the Heyoka. He's the one that is the jokester in the court jesters. And he is the one that can get away with making a joke out of very serious things and not get beheaded. But he essentially is telling you, if you notice, he's right on the precipice here. His head is looking up. He doesn't have a care in the world. He's going to jump off. He's just going to walk right off the ledge. And he has total trust and innocence, meaning he has total faith that he will not fall. And it is said that in his bag here, he carries all the tools that he needs to succeed. And in tarot world, that means, you know, the wands, the swords, the pentacles. What am I leaving out? The cups. So you look at this, and the card is yellow, meaning it's positive, it's optimistic, it's of the mind. He's carrying the wand, which carries energy. So this is where he goes with you on your journey. Because how many times in your lives have you felt like you've had to leap into a void, where you've had to make a decision without feeling like you had all the facts that you needed in order to really know what was best, yet having to just kind of say, I really think this is the way to go, and go. And that's the Fool. So then very happily, the rest of these line up quite well if I have them right side up for you. They go 1 through 21, or 22 here, 21, see, sorry. Okay. The very first line, 1 through 7, is personal growth. This is your individuation. This is you learning to get along in the world. And so the magician is focused attention. You'll notice the magician has the 4 tools on his table. Now this, some people say, and I tend to agree with them, that he's backwards. He should be having the wand in his left hand. It's not going to matter, I don't think. There. Yeah, just tell me when to slide it back. Because he's holding the wand up to receive information from above. You receive with your left, you focus and point and direct with your right. So some people say that it got reversed either during the printing or something, but nonetheless, this is how it is. And this is an elemental kind of energy that allows us to have conscious creation. It's a male energy, number one. It's putting out what you can do, focused. And it's the discipline to make things happen. 2 is the priestess. I don't know how you, I'm thinking I should have done these individually. The priestess is the energy of 2. It's the first female energy, and this energy is, the high priestess represents ancient and unrevealed knowledge. You notice she's sitting between 2 pillars, and behind her are the fruits of knowledge. She doesn't see them. And it's also called the virgin. It's the awakening. It's awakening to intuition. And she is the one, the seeker of deeper meanings and being able to look at her intuition. Are you guys with me? I hate to keep talking and say, what is she talking about? Then the third is the Empress. This is the great mother energy. It's fecundity, fertility, abundance, creation, creative force. And this is creative courage. And you'll notice that the Empress is a heavily pregnant woman. And I don't know if you can see with these pictures, but she's surrounded by rabbits and fields that are growing well. And there's a heart here with a female symbol here. And it's just very lush. It's very clear that this is fertile, very fertile. And so we're moving on. You see, we've gone from the child that's learning to use his skills. We're getting now into the mother figure. The emperor is the father figure, and this is the archetypal energy of the father and all that that means. And it's masculine sexuality, it's confidence, but it's the domination of intelligence and reason over emotion and passion. Now, doesn't that fit if you think of how many couples and the mother is going, oh, poor Johnny, we've got to take care of him, and the father is going, no, he needs to learn his lesson. He needs to be able to live in this world and pay the consequences for his behavior. He needs to learn that this is the way the world works, where the mother just wants to wrap him up and just prevent him from ever getting hurt. It's a classic archetypal kind of a thing. Now, all of these can play in both men and women. These are not our physical beings. These are the energies that are playing out. And believe me, I'm giving you a very simplistic running through with these things. We could talk for hours on any one of them if we wanted to. But it also, the emperor number is 4, and that's stability. It's the first figure that has 4 sides that encloses something. It's stable. And so that's part of what that means. Then the Hierophant, that's 5. In many places it's called the Pope or the Papess, depending on the deck. But you'll notice the figure here, there's 2 supplicants below, and it does look like the Pope. And this is organized religion, but the energy of it is the inner teacher. It's mastery of the spiritual self, learning the rules and laws of religion. So this is the first where it's learning something outside of self that are governing your behavior and so forth. But it's conformity, and sometimes it can be a tendency to cling to ideas and thoughts that are outmoded. Then we come to the Lovers and the Chariot. And this is where we start more blending with others. The Lovers, it's the healing union, and it's the awakening of sexuality. But it also can be the time when you have to choose between the darkness and the light. So you may have like the evil twin and the good twin, and you're 2 different things that you're needing to choose between to see which direction you're going to go in. But it's also the union of coming together with another. And it's opposing forces, male, female, good, bad. So that's another really important lesson. It's the tension of opposites. And interestingly enough, the Lover's number is 6. And in numerology, 6 is harmony and balance and cycling. So that's kind of an interesting, you understand we could talk for hours on each of these cards. So this is kind of like a whirlwind trip. The Chariot, if you pay, I don't know if you can see. Let me see if I can. Because I think it would be worth seeing here. Hold on. Let me show you the Chariot here for just a minute. When you look at this Chariot, what?
Flip it, please.
I'm sorry?
Could you flip it?
Flip?
Mirror.
Oh, sorry, thank you. Looked okay to me. You can tell I'm not a detail-oriented person. Thank you. What do you notice about that Chariot, about him, as he's driving the Sphinxes?
Balance.
What's missing?
Right. Reins.
Mm-hmm. That's one of the key things. But you're right, balance is another piece of that that's very important. He's got the 4-cornered top on here. Everything is real structured, the balance here. It is very balanced. But what this is saying, it's winning success through working your will. And this is where you learn that when you put forth your will in a disciplined manner, then you can achieve your goals. And so that's the real key thing to notice that. Now, we have completed the first line. At this point, you need to have understood these things before you can go on into the next one. And the basic things are the surrender of and your will, and to the creation of parents and society. I've just gone through all of that with you. Line 2 is the search for self-knowledge. The mask of the ego must die. And this is, as we move into maturity, we start having more of these things But again, this is not linear. You can have a 50-year-old person dealing with some of these issues. They come and go, back and forth, back and forth. So just because you learn the lesson once doesn't mean it's not going to come back again. Learning it a different way, understanding it differently according to the limits of your own understanding. And it's the time, generally, I would say in the early mid-40s, is when people start to go, what is the meaning of my life? Why am I here? What have I accomplished? Why haven't I gotten accomplished what I wanted to? Where am I going from here? These are the issues that will start to come up. And one of the things is the answers to a lot of these are not anything you can learn. They have to be experienced. And so it isn't like you can read a lot of books and talk about it a lot and you're done. You have to live through it. So we start with strength. If you notice strength, it's really interesting to me. You have this woman dressed in white with a lemniscate over her head, and she's holding this lion, holding him with his jaws, and there's no struggle, and she does not appear to be in the least bit afraid. Anybody any idea what that might mean?
She has mastery over the physical body, desire body. She's the enchantress.
Mm-hmm. It means that in symbology, the lion stands for carnal desire. It's your physical desires and passions. But when they open it up to passion, it can be passion toward whatever, but it's on the physical level of wanting something. She's spirit. And this is the focused control of your passions and desires. So there's no struggle and no danger. And the word is spiritual strength. And this is the ability to resolve conflicts between your conscious and your unconscious. And again, this has to be lived. It can't be something you can read about. And then we go to the hermit. Now, the hermit, number 9. 9 is endings and completion. What would you think about the hermit when you look at him? The hermit is right here. It shows a figure on the top of a mountain standing with a lamp, which represents enlightenment, and he's clearly by himself. And the word hermit, it always means somebody wants to live alone. And this card represents the light of higher ways. And when this card comes up, it generally means somebody that is wanting to listen to their inner guidance. They are reflective. They may be seeking out a spiritual advisor, someone to study with, but they're really trying to understand the spiritual implications, to recognize the divine within. And this card, and when people are in that mode, a lot of the times you'll see that they get more quiet. They're not as interested in partying and being out and about and so forth and so on. And I have, some people will say this is the light in the dark night of the soul. And I tend to have gotten away from using that phrase because I've seen it applied to so many different of the tarot cards. I don't think you can point to any one card where the dark night of the soul applies. Several of these cards, if they hit you just right, can really knock you for a loop and give you a very difficult time. And that's part of the lessons, part of what has to happen to learn what you need to learn. The next is the Wheel of Fortune. And this is universal cycles, adaptation to change. When that card shows up, it means things are moving around and your life is changing. Not necessarily in a negative way. It could be you won the lottery. But it means things have changed and it's cycling. Getting used to letting things change and change. And it can be fortune, change of luck, so it's definitely not necessarily a negative card. The next one, Justice, is balanced judgment. And this is as opposed to the Emperor here, who's the authority figure. Justice comes from a deeper level. That is the balanced judgment. It's the search for equilibrium. It's when we feel inside that we want things to be just, to be fair, right action, that kind of thing. Yes?
When you get justice on a card for someone, does it necessarily mean like they're going to experience karma in either a good or bad way?
No, it doesn't. It can. It can also mean a legal judgment that is coming in their favor. And that is how it's interpreted quite often. And it does mean balanced judgment. So looking at the other cards around it, when it's upright, most ordinarily I would say look at it as being positive for the querent. If it's upside down, then there's a whole lot of other interpretations, but it could be that things are not just and not fair. And so you'd have to use your intuition to see whether it applied to something karmic, something from past lives, or something that's just going on in that person's life right that time. It may just signal that the person has that question. You know, that this is a dilemma. They're trying to figure out what's right action in this case. And the cards can help make that decision for the person. Then we come to the Hanged Man. And this is another one that ought to be looked at carefully. If I can find him. Because, do you see here? This is not clear enough, I think, but I think to me, one of the things that is most important to notice, he's smiling. Now, this is the typical cross that people were hung to death on in the early Roman times. And here he is tied, and he's just swinging away, smiling away, seemingly in no distress. Now that got to mean something. So what do you think the Hanged Man might suggest?
Surrender.
Absolutely. That's exactly what it means.
Would you repeat that, please?
Surrender. The cross here, this bar represents earth. This represents the cross section when the spirit divine comes through earth. He's tied right at that crux. And happenstance, his foot, his leg makes an upside down 4. What is 4? Stability. His whole world is turned upside down. But it's surrender. It's that moment when a person has usually been going through some tough times, has been struggling and struggling, and it's that moment when they just surrender to the will of the divine, and they are then at peace, and they can rest. And it's said it's reversing false images, because a lot of what we are taught in the mundane world is exactly opposite of what is true from a spiritual perspective. Yeah, I mean, just like most of us grow up to believe that we need to have an important job, making a lot of money, having a nice house, and a new car, and blah, blah, blah. And then as we get older, we think, you know, what does that all mean in the scheme of things? Is it kind of a reversal of how we were taught to believe? It can be life in suspension. And it's a transition, a change. And it can leave you with a feeling of being deeply connected to life. And it's showing that there's much inner work being done with an outer appearance of standstill. How many of you have been in that place where it doesn't look from the outside like much of anything's happening, but inside there's just... And so again, these are things that don't ordinarily happen to people until they're adults. You don't usually see this so much with kids. Although I don't know in the future if these kids come in very different than years ago. And then the Death card. Now, if people get that card And that's one that they freak out on. It does not mean the death of a human being. It's the ending of a situation, way of life, something that needed to die. It can be a sudden ending. And it's that moment of death before the new has come in. And it is given the phrase new opportunities and transformation, and the task is to abandon outmoded or false attachments. All right, so the third journey, this is the great journey. These are people that have made a commitment in this life when they come in. Now, we all will go through all the steps eventually, but before you come into a life, you choose the lessons you want to work on. For those that have chosen these lessons, these are the ones that will appear. And this is the, once you have to go through the other two lines first in order to be able to deal with these. Otherwise, you cannot. I mean, you would not be able to. I'm not sure about rules. This one is coming to a new understanding in what is present in liberation. Forces of light and dark are bound together. You need to go into the darkness in order to get beyond the veil of the priestess and get to the light. Yes, ma'am? I don't know if this... Oh, thank you. I wish I'd thought of that earlier, sorry. All right. The first one is the devil. What do you think about the devil?
Bound by your cardinal desire.
Mm-hmm.
Testing?
It's testing for sure. The devil is acknowledging your hidden recesses. And it's like you said, it is bound by the material reality. It can be addictions. It is when you are really into the physical material world. And you can be addicted to things. You may be really trying to get focused on your things in life. All of that kind of thing, to the exclusion of your spiritual life. So when that shows up, it says you got to think more about the spiritual part of your life. I don't think you can see it from there, but let me show you here, because this is a piece that I think matters. You'll see a man and a woman with a chain around the neck. Now this represents the horned god Pan, and he's for play. And he can represent the desire to go play. But it's play from a physical, mundane thing. It's just go have a good time. But it can be addictions too. And that's I keep repeating that because that shows up a lot when people have problems with that. When I was still learning to read the tarot, and I'd ask everybody if they'd let me read. A woman and I were talking, and she was complaining that she couldn't lose weight, and she was trying and nothing worked, and she also wanted a tarot reading, so I did one. First card was the devil. Now who do you suppose this was referring to? I'm sorry? Well, it meant that she was focusing entirely on her food, and because of that, she couldn't lose weight, because that's all she thought about. So if that's all she thinks about, she's going to be constantly wanting to eat. But it was kind of an interesting way of how this kind of can play out. But what I want you to notice, these chains are very loose. They can just pick them up and let go if they want to, you know. And this essentially is what that card is saying, that you need to identify your projections and this shadow content. You can't skip it over. You will not be able to really, really grow unless you really acknowledge your shadow side. And this is also a card of illusions. It can be depression, illness, wrongdoing, any one of a number of things like that. Next is the Tower. Now, what do you think about the Tower?
Tower of Babel.
Sometimes they say that that's the Tower of Babel, but if you get that card in a reading, what would you suppose?
Bankruptcy.
Could be.
Upheaval.
Uh-huh.
Getting the rug pulled out from under you.
Absolutely. It's called reorganizing the personality. This is reorganizing the personality. This is the card I would expect many of the people in Haiti to be getting, because it can be that severe. It's something that has happened that makes you have to reorganize your belief systems and everything about in your life. And it almost always has accompanying a very difficult time in a person's life when they're having major, major upheavals. For the first 2 years, when I started studying the tarot, and I'd have the teacher read cards for me, the Tower card always came up. And my life was changing. I mean, it was just lots of stuff going on. I bought a statue of a tower. I have it to this day. I've come to love the card and the tower. So it was good. I learned so much. It was a time of great learning for me, but it was a difficult time. It is the shattering of illusions. And when people have this card, it can mean that they have to really reform their whole belief system, because the things that they thought were true in fact and given aren't. People that have been in prolonged periods of severe torture suffer with that. All kinds of things where people have had horrendous, horrendous things happen to them where the normal way of thinking just doesn't apply anymore. Then the next is the Star. That is a card of reflection. It's the card of hope. It's a card of meditation. It's the card that says an easy communication with the divine. And you can see by looking at it, it's peaceful, it's quiet. The moon, guess what? We go back into unbalance. This is a card of rapid psychic development. It can mean insanity, but it means it's a time of really learning. It's a cycle of inner development, but it comes quick and deep. And people may hallucinate. They may have visions. And this is where we were talking, the other day about needing to have guidance and stability, because you can really get off the mark if you enter into that without the proper foundation of it. The Sun, that is the triumphant renewal. The Sun is light. Light is knowledge. It's success. It is to learn to balance the unconscious and conscious material. Then Judgment. We go once again to reach the summons for rebirth, reawakening. And this is heard and answered from within. And again, everything is this whole line. You keep learning and learning and learning and learning, and it goes fluctuating back and forth from feeling light to feeling really dark, feeling light, feeling dark. Judgment is a time of rebirth. You're coming up out of where you were before and a feeling of ending. And you're on the verge of blending with universal consciousness, which is the world. And that's this last one. And you see this oval shape, circle. And this is the essence of one's spirit. Now, I doubt very many of us ever get to that point. For any more than a minute, you may have a brief time where you feel one with the universe. But it's the completion of one cycle and the potential of the beginning of a new one. So, I guess...
Sharon, how long did it take you to get mastery over the tarot?
I don't know you can ever say you've mastered the tarot. It seems I've been studying it for 30 years at least. And the more I study, the more I know I don't know. It's just an amazing tool. There are all kinds of ways of studying it. And I had made a reference thing, and somehow I didn't bring it here. But there are all kinds of books. I learned by studying each card till I had memorized it. Mary Greer, who's a wonderful teacher and very knowledgeable, she recommends you just look at the cards and see what they evoke to you. If we have time, I can show you a quick exercise about learning about the card that's kind of interesting to me. Let me see. Are there other questions?
I just wanted to make a comment.
One way to learn about the tarot is to look at the card and really look at each part of it. And as you're looking at it, and give yourself a few minutes to really look at all the pieces. Can you see all the pieces from where you are? All right. Make up a story about what's going on in that. What's happening to the figures that are in that card. And just do it in your head. Interesting things with readings. A woman came to me one time wanting to know about her job. She was in sales, and they had started dividing up the products. So they'd have this different salespeople from the same company going into the same other companies to sell. And she said, I don't understand why they're doing it. And there's a reading to do for work things, and what it showed was their hidden agenda was that they were planning to split the company and sell part of the company. So they were dividing their salespeople for the split. And that was an interesting thing, because I'm not a businessy sort of person, so I'm not the person to do tarot for business ordinarily. But there have been different things. There's been a lot of different things where something will just stick in my mind because, you know what the cards mean, but in this instance, the card has a completely different meaning. And when I was reading for the man that I learned from, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the Foundation of Truth.
Yes.
Well, you had to read for all the board members before you'd be allowed to read at that place. And I was doing that to get permission, which I got. And when I read for my teacher, and I can't remember now what card, but however I explained, he said, that is a very unusual explanation. He said, that's very accurate, but I've never heard anybody interpret that card like that before. And that was like, yeah.
You say you read from all the cards rather than just the major arcana?
It depends. Most of the time I read from all the cards, but depending on the situation, I may choose just the major arcana. If it's just simply a spiritual question, and if we had had more time, I had a couple of things. One of them is, what spiritual lesson am I learning now, and what is coming in, and what spiritual lesson will help me get there? Another one that I love is, what makes me mad, meaning what makes me crazy? And that one, you separate it all into the aces, the court cards, the minor arcana, and the major arcana. The major arcana will tell you what spiritual lesson you're learning. The minor arcana will tell you the situation and event. The court card will tell you the person or the personalities that's affecting. This is what makes it, just pushes your buttons. And then the ace will tell you where in your being that it affects you. And that can be very helpful. But normally I use the whole deck. It just depends what the person wants and what the situation is about, and how much time there is, and all kinds of different things. And the more, the more readings you do, the more you just play with it and do whatever. That's what Mary Greer taught me, that you could just do whatever you want.
All right, we want to thank you, Sharon Reynolds, for this. You've convinced me about the tarot.
Have you really?
Yes. Yeah, yes, you did.